No matter how much you upgrade or tune, the chances are your bike is not going to look or ride like the pros' bikes do. Whilst consumer components aren't far behind in product life cycles, pro riders' bikes will always feature a few significant differences that set them apart from their showroom counterparts, some of which are not easy to spot. The differences between a pro's bike and your own are all in the name of speed, and while some might not be realistic for the average rider, they're still fascinating to study. Here's 5 pro bike setup tips I've spotted whilst covering the hottest tech from events like the Downhill World Champs, Vanta Jam and Red Bull Hardline. Don't forget to subscribe to BikeRadar, and every Wednesday we'll drop a new MBUK video. Many of us could only dream of having our suspension precisely set up for the trail we're riding, rather than just setting and forgetting when we buy our new bike. Professional riders have access to a variety of technical data which allows them to set up their bikes for the best possible performance on a specific racetrack. They are also lucky enough to have access to mechanics and suspension engineers who not only set up their suspension but also employ their specialist knowledge to minimise friction by modifying parts and using specialist lubricants. Working alongside suspension engineers, professional riders are able to test out various setups to see which offers the best traction and impact protection on the trails. This is especially the case in downhill, where riders have dedicated mechanics who swap out coils, change air can tunes, and use telematic data to decipher where more grip can be achieved on the run. When videographer Max and I visited Red Bull Hardline earlier this year, we saw riders increasing their air pressure and choosing firmer coil springs than usual to keep the bike stable on takeoffs and safe from bottoming out too hard on the landings. The Hardline track is so extreme that riders have to substitute grip on the technical sections for impact protection, using their immense skill to pilot a stiff bike through rooty and rocky terrain. World record holder of the longest ever backflip, Tom Eistedt, is another rider who chooses ultra-firm suspension to help hold up his giant glory when hitting massive jumps and performing incredible tricks. Some professional downhill racers and an increasing amount of enduro racers use coil shocks for their resilience to heat buildup and low friction qualities. Others choose air shocks, allowing them the chance to tune the spring progression curve with volume spacers and make quick and infinite spring rate adjustments. Spring rates on coil shocks can be difficult and expensive to fine-tune, as the entire spring needs to be replaced each time a stiffer or softer setup is needed. The cost of this can soon add up when trialling different setups or even setting the correct sag. This is one of the reasons that store-bought bikes come equipped with air shocks, because they only require a shock pump to adjust them and can be set up for a wide range of rider weights right off the shop floor. However, being a pro rider is not always as glamorous as it seems. Professional riders are often contractually obliged to use only products supplied by their sponsors. So depending on who is supplying their suspension, you may be able to match or even surpass their setups with an off-the-shelf combo of components. It's always worth looking at what privateer World Cup races are running. They have the pick of the products available and have to shell out their own money on a setup. So if they've chosen to spend their cash on a product in the hunt for World Cup glory, it's probably the best you can get. Suspension setup can be complicated, so the backing of a team of boffins as tech support is very valuable. However, for the average rider, a trip to your local bike shop to set the sag is within reach. And if you're serious about your riding, then a bike setup day with a suspension specialist is money well spent. Something we all try to avoid adding to our bikes is extra weight, with many of us weight weenies searching for the lightest components from the cockpit to the drivetrain. However, many pro downhill racers have started adding strategically positioned weights to their race bikes, with the intention of improving the ratio of sprung to unsprung mass. Unsprung mass is the weight of the components that move with the undulations of the ground and aren't supported by the suspension. Components that make up unsprung mass include the wheels, fork lowers, brake discs and calipers, and the mech and cassette on bikes with a traditional drivetrain. Conversely, sprung mass of the bike is any weight which is isolated from the ground or suspended by the suspension, consisting of the front triangle of the frame, the cranks and pedals, and the cockpit and fork uppers. Increasing the ratio of sprung weight to unsprung weight makes the suspension work more effectively, increasing traction and reducing rider fatigue. If you've ever ridden an e-bike, you will probably have noticed the stability and smooth ride on rough terrain owing to the extra sprung mass from the battery and the motor. Increasing rider weight doesn't really affect this ratio, as the rider is not rigidly connected to the bike. The rider still has to support their weight on the bike and use the muscles in their arms and legs to absorb the inputs transmitted to them through the bike. Weights added to bikes are usually added low down by the bottom bracket to keep the centre of gravity of the bike low, aiding stability. Although some riders have in the past added weights around the head tube and handlebar area too. This is more focused in reducing feedback to the rider through the fork. There is also the gravitational effect of adding more weight to your bike. Many people think that in theory a heavier bike will gather more momentum when rolling downhill. However, this isn't a soapbox derby. Any extra bike weight will slow the rider down when pedaling, increasing the energy needed to accelerate. It will also make the bike slower to decelerate when braking, changing direction, or when the rider tries to manual or hop. Recreational riders may wince at the thought of having to pedal lead weights to the top of a hill, but if you're downhill racing, then taping extra weight to your down tube may be a cheap way of finding extra time on steep, rough tracks. One of the main differences between professional and amateur bikes is the level of research that goes into setting the bike up. Most casual riders will set their bikes up as close to the parameters that are recommended by the manufacturer as possible, mostly focusing on sag settings and rebound. Professional bikes are often spotted with an array of telematic sensors to accurately collect data from the bike. Loic Bruni's prototype specialised Project Black bike had cables and brightly coloured buttons on the handlebars. What do? We can only speculate. They may be to do with timing sections or even locking out his suspension on the pedally parts of the track. Saracen mechanics in charge of Matt Walker's prototype Mist downhill bike with its 6-bar linkage were proud of how well the data acquisition hardware was stealthily hidden inside the frame. Top marks for execution there. We think that Saracen's move to put so much effort into designing parts of their prototype frame around data acquisition systems shows just how important and ubiquitous they are in modern downhill racing. Sensors on the fork and shock can give mechanics insights into how the suspension should be set up, with riders running practice laps with their software recording their every move in order to eke out all the performance from their bike on specific tracks. But suspension movement isn't the only measure recorded, with brake pressure also monitored, telling riders where they're braking and how hard. Speed sensors on the wheels can tell riders where the wheels are locked up due to heavy braking and how this is affecting the suspension's action. Consumer versions of brake sensors are Brake Ace's caliper-mounted examples. Whilst software like this can be accessed by regular punters through companies like Dial Telemetry and sensors such as Quark's ShockWiz, professional riders have a secret weapon in an army of mechanics and suspension engineers who are at their disposal for every track they race on. The system could even help riders work out the best possible braking points using GPS data and brake force data to calculate the shortest distance required to brake. Tyre pressures can also be monitored via computer, with wheel-mounted sensors such as Quark's TyreWiz allowing riders to make sure they're at optimal pressure. The feedback from all this data can be poured over by riders and engineers together, helping them extract the maximum performance from bike setup and ultimately the rider on track. While you may have spent thousands of pounds securing the latest kit for your bike, you'll always be behind the professionals and their prototype tech. By far the biggest difference between professional and off-the-shelf bikes is the prototype technology reserved for riders at the top end of the sport. Downhill has long been regarded as the Formula One of mountain biking, where the latest and greatest tech innovations are put to the test in the heat of racing. Many manufacturers are keen to tease new releases on their bikes, with sponsored riders being the first to receive revolutionary new tech. For example, Pivot has been kicking up a storm this year with Bernard Kerr at the helm of its prototype Firebird. The bike features a carbon-lugged frame not dissimilar to the Atherton bikes. This technique enables changes to be made to the frame quickly during the development process without spending time creating a new mould for an entire carbon frame. Sometimes though, this is unavoidable, and we caught up with free racer Cade Edwards at Bike Park Wales's Vanta Jam this year, where he was running a Trek Remedy but with a custom frame to suit his freeride needs, with a mullet setup and completely custom geometry. Sniffing through the pits at a UCI World Cup offers a glimpse of the tech we'd expect to see trickling down in the next couple of years. Brands are aware of this, with many choosing to hide their unreleased prototype frames beneath custom shrouds, protecting intellectual property from the competition. A prototype specialised downhill bike has been racing in this guise for the past year under Loic Bruni and Finn Isles at Lenzerheide. The frame was initially covered by a neoprene sling, but Specialized have now developed a hard plastic cover hiding the linkage and bottom bracket area, which is what we saw at the World Champs at Fort William. Another bike with a neoprene shroud was Mondraker's prototype downhill bike, which has since been unmasked, but before this it sure kept everyone guessing. It's also common to see professional riders with unreleased but production-ready products. For example, when we caught up with Kyle Strait at Red Bull Hardline, he was riding both a pre-production Vitas downhill frame, which is still yet to be released, and a pre-production example of RockShox's new Boxer fork, hidden in plain sight before it was released in July. When you're hurtling down a track at full speed, even the smallest thing can distract your attention, causing you to go off the racing line, or worse. Professional bikes will be carefully set up to remove any rattles, clunks, clangs and bangs that may take the rider's attention away from the trail below. Impeccable maintenance, lubing up chains and making sure that grease-packed fresh bearings are always fitted is the ultimate way to stop unwanted rattles and squeaks. But there are modifications that World Cup mechanics can do to help silence their pros' bikes. There are many ways that mechanics can implement these changes to quieten bikes. Chain strike in the frames and chain guides can be a big source of noise, so extending chainstay protectors and a liberal use of mastic tape is a great way to dampen any noise. We've also seen some handy hacks using the loopy side of Velcro being stuck on chain guides and other areas where chain contact happens to keep the rattles at bay. Cables rattling against the frame can also be a leading source of bike noise, so more loopy Velcro or mastic where gear and brake cables make contact with the frame is in order. Many of these mods are time consuming and require patience, but it's worth it, because a quiet bike is a fast bike, as the maxim states. If you enjoyed learning about the ways that the pros set up their bikes, give this video a like and subscribe for more MBUK videos every Wednesday.